Hi everyone, I'm Annick. I'm the founder of Immaculate Vegan. And today I'm delighted to be talking to Casey Dworkin, who's the founder of the most amazing footwear brand, Sylven New York. They're one of our favorite brands at Immaculate. Our topic today is going to be all things vegan leather, which I think is both a really fascinating but also potentially thorny subject, and one we get asked about a lot at Immaculate. So I really wanted to talk to Casey about this, as she launched Sylven with both animal leather and vegan leather styles, although she's recently had some kind of exciting changes in direction there, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So she's very informed on the topic, and I know she's going to have some really interesting insights. So welcome, Casey. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
It is my absolute pleasure.
Before we get stuck into all things vegan leather, can you just start by telling us a little bit about Sylven and, well, what do you do, what's it all about, and why did you start the business?
Absolutely. So Sylven New York is now officially a fully plant-based and vegan luxury footwear brand, all made in Italy. And we focus on really innovative new technology and new materials to really be as nature-based as possible, which has always been part of our foundation. And we weren't always, as you mentioned, we have not always been a fully vegan brand. And that's kind of been a new transition for us. But I always look through the lens of sustainability, which means so many different things to so many different people. And, something being sustainable and something being vegan aren't necessarily synonymous. So my background, I happen to be born on Earth Day, and I was like a really young environmental activist. It's kind of a cute, I like joke that it's in my blood because I grew up celebrating Earth Day before it was kind of this big, almost now commercialized holiday, especially in the sustainable fashion space. But I grew up being really environmentally active and really interested in fashion, very separately from one another, because really at the time, the conversation that linked the two kind of didn't exist. And as I developed my career, I always wanted to be in footwear. And I decided when I launched something of my own, sustainability was going to be one of the guiding principles for how I created the brand. So, every season, every year, it's, I'm finding constantly new ways to do things that are going to have as minimal impact on the planet, but are still going to be like really luxe, high end, beautiful styles that people want to wear and ultimately should just be able to speak for themselves.
Yeah, amazing. And so your background is as a product and footwear designer, right?
Yes.
So when did you launch Sylven? How long have you been going?
Sure. I launched officially in 2017. So September of 2017, we launched our first, website iteration with like 3 styles. It was really, really small. And at the time, it was a fully leather collection. Even back in 2017, I started right off the bat looking for vegan options, and anything available that I could source was full on. It was, polyurethane, PVC, plastic, all of the things that have been in the market for ages that I was really hesitant to start to work with. And I figured I would rather find versions of things that are going to have a longer lifespan than to work with something that was going to be totally petroleum and plastic based. But I kept my finger on the pulse every step of the way. From, the last 4 years, I spend a lot of time researching and sourcing, because I think materials are one of my big passions, but also so important to how a shoe is made and how it holds up.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So, because in 2017, I think, I'm trying to think when I became a vegan, maybe just a year before that. And certainly when I first started looking at vegan fashion, a lot of the options were, like you say, there was a lot of, PVC, I think what was called pleather at the time.
Pleather, exactly.
Right, which was kind of, it didn't look very nice. It didn't feel very nice. And we all know now about the, the environmental aspect of PVC as well. It's really toxic. So the choices just really weren't there, were they? And then we launched in 2019 towards the end of that.
Yeah.
And even by then, the choices had, I've seen a really big,
definitely,
and certainly, way more of those kind of those plant-based leathers. So, which will, I'd love to talk about.
That's kind of a perfect transition, because 2019 was our first vegan collection launch.
Okay.
So I finally was able to source and find a vegan leather that met my sustainable standards. And I started working with apple leather, which is still one of my signature and favorite plant-based materials to work with. And at that time, I decided I was going to do versions of both. So I would create a style and I would do a vegetable tanned leather version which is a type of leather that, you know, I don't know how much you want to go into
Well,
my
yeah, it would
yeah.
be really nice to talk about that. I mean, maybe, yeah, tell us a bit more about kind of your transition, and then I'd really like to dive into more about vegetable tan leather. What is it? How does it compare to vegan leathers? And, you know, how does it compare in terms of sustainability as well? So I definitely want to talk about that. But yeah, just maybe, you know, finish telling us about kind of, you know, where you got to and kind of getting to where you are today.
Totally. So in 2019, I launched a new collection that I started working with fantastic factories out of Italy. And I really wanted I wanted to do a leather version of a style and a vegan version of the exact same style and sell them on the same platform. And so I spoke and continue to speak a lot about vegan leather and regular leather and the differences. And my whole conversation, which is one I'm still very much having, is like, neither one of the options is perfect and neither one of them is like, you know, like you can vilify, and, you know, there's pros and cons to each. And so I've always just been, this is what we like about this is what we don't like about this, and kind of letting it be up to the consumer to decide what's best for them and, you know, what they feel like is going to work best in their life. But it was also a really cool way to test vegan styles and to test, as a brand who has historically been using leather. You know, a lot of people will say, oh, you know, your customer, she's used to leather and she thinks leather means luxury, so she's not going to buy a shoe that's made from something that's not leather based.
Yeah.
And sorry, I've got an incoming call. It totally
You're sort of.
yeah, exactly.
And what did happen? Like, was that a reality? Did you find?
No, it was like the greatest,
the vegan leather.
it was the greatest finding that I could have had, where like I have a great customer who's really interested in, I mean, I'm made in Italy. I'm made alongside some of the really top tier designers. The quality of my shoes is something I'm so proud of. And I find, thank you. And I find that my luxury customer is interested in my fashion items. You know, if I have a white boot and she's been looking for a white boot, she wants it because of the look and the feel. And then the fact that it is vegan, or specifically apple leather, I think tells a story so much differently than a lot of other vegan materials. And so she's willing to try it because it's something new and innovative and interesting. But the benefit also to making leather and non-leather at the same time is that all of my vegan leathers have to look and feel just as good as the highest quality Italian leathers that exist, because often they're literally on a shelf right next to one another, or they're on my website right next to one another. So like, you can't hide that, you know, something is like, oh, well, this one's vegan and this one's real. Like I often, if I'm in person with someone, will ask them to guess. Here, you can touch and feel which is which. Like, it's been a really, not only the sustainability aspect of things, but like as a luxury brand, everything needs to look and feel as high end as, you know, it's, you know, real or synthetic counterpart. So it's,
people aren't going to compromise, are they? I mean, they're not buying things because they want to feel worthy. They need a product that is
absolutely. We're not trying to pull one over on anyone either. We're trying to say, I mean, the materials we work with are also made in Italy, and they're really high end and luxe, and they're made out of plants and other materials that are better for the environment, and they're made in such a way that like you can put a vegan leather shoe next to the highest quality Italian leather shoe. And in my opinion, you know, they should hold up. They should look just as good.
Yeah. And when I think with yours, they absolutely do. I'll get on to kind of why you've made the shift to vegan leather only in a minute, because I think that's really interesting. But can you talk us more about, you know, animal leather and obviously the kind of animal leather that you are using? I know is kind of the most kind of ethical, sustainable that you could. Talk us a bit about how you see that kind of animal leather in terms of, you know, all the attributes you would look for, right? Quality, performance, durability, all those things. And then how does that compare to vegan leather, and particularly the vegan leathers obviously that you've been using and you're very familiar with?
Yeah, I really like to, I feel like I've tried my best to kind of like simplify the concept of like, who's, you know, you've got vegan versus real leather and who outperforms whom in, you know, in what situation. And like, in terms of durability, like if you just look at the material itself, you know, we're not talking about the manufacturing process. We're talking about, you know, here's a swatch of apple leather and here's a swatch of a vegetable tanned leather. The vegetable tanned leather is going to outlast the apple leather in terms of lifespan. Like just when it comes down to, if you're A to B comparing, it's going to
Yeah.
last a little longer. You're going to and it wears nicely with age. But then you start to look at the making process. So I was always sourcing leathers that were really close to my factories, because I think supply chain in general is something that's really important to take into consideration. How are you getting things from point A to point B? So I worked with tanneries that were in the same region, which was great because, that way, they're working with the farmers. It's all traceable. That there's all sorts of certifications for how they deal with water runoff and, what kind of chemicals they are or are not using. I was really particular about being as chemical free as possible, so that the end life should be able to be biodegradable when you return the leather into the ground, which is still something that's, kind of in process with vegan leathers for footwear specifically, because they have so many durability and, performance aspects that other categories of fashion don't have kind of the same needs as a shoe would.
Yeah, they're getting a lot of wear.
Exactly. So we do a lot of resistance testing, and they actually make these really cool machines that mimic somebody walking. It's almost like a little treadmill. And so you see like how many steps can you, how far can you push the limits of a material, so that that it's going to be able to be usable for a footwear product, as, a bag, a dress, a skirt, everything that we wear. And this is maybe where my product design background comes in too. It's like, shoes are a really specific product, and they're used, like they are something, they're on your feet and they carry the full weight of your body. So they're going to have a very different need from another type of product that you're using in your day-to-day life. So in order to maintain that structure, at the moment, there still are some synthetic materials synthesized differently than, some of the plant-based materials, where you will have some plastics or some chemicals combined, so that you still get that resistance. And I always like to be transparent about that, where like, I feel like I'm jumping a little bit all over the place, because I'm like, leather's great at this, not good at this, but vegan leather is coming along.
Kind of like, it's just
it's all interrelated.
Yeah,
exactly. So like, the process of making vegan leather, especially a plant-based leather, is just so much less environmentally harmful. Like,
okay. So talk about that. Why is, because obviously sustainability gets talked about a lot, doesn't it? And you said earlier, just because something's vegan doesn't mean it's sustainable.
Does not make it sustainable.
True.
Exactly.
So how do they compare in terms of sustainability then?
So when I break down leather and vegan things, vegan leather, I think first about like, what does it take to create the product? So it's easy to talk about a leather swatch and a vegan leather swatch, where you say, well, the leather one might last longer, but what does it take to create the leather before it exists as a leather? And honestly, animal agriculture is one of the leading contributing causes to all of the environmental issues that we have in terms of, carbon emissions, water use, land degradation. Like, there's so much that goes into raising cattle. Exactly. Like, every precious resource we have is touched by the agricultural industry in some way or another. And so the amount of resources that it takes to raise cattle, even if it's being done in, a more ethical or sustainable way in, a small farm in Italy versus, a massive factory farm in a different country, it still has a massive impact that is just so much different when it comes to vegan leather. Especially, like, we work with apple leather, which is made from organic apple waste. So we're talking about a byproduct. Oh my gosh, I love that you have that handy. I feel like I should have one on my screen. Like, we're talking about an organic byproduct of something that's already being made. So we're talking about waste. We're not even talking about creation. We're talking about taking something that would go to landfill, and we're talking about taking organic matter that would go to landfill. And that's such a huge contributor to greenhouse gases in and of itself. Like, organic food waste is a massive problem. So if you're able to take food waste and transform it into something that's replacing the entire animal agriculture industry for leather, not even taking into consideration the leather tanning process. So for leather, you've got the raising of cattle and the land and the resource use. And then you have the process of creating the leather from the skin. And that in and of itself is a very chemically intensive process. uses a ton of water. And that was one of the big trade-offs that I found. So I'll kind of circle back to vegetable tanned leather,
Yeah.
which is a leather that's made with plant-based materials. So instead of, using chemical dyes to give something a bright color, you're using things like spruce and tree bark. So it keeps the material much more natural and you're using far less toxic chemicals. But then the water that you need in order to create it, like the water usage is like 10 times the amount that you would use for the chemical leather, just because it's a much longer process to make.
Yeah.
So like you're just like it's like a whack-a-mole of sustainable issues, like
You've got
which
one
one
problem, then you've got another one.
exactly, you plug the boat in the the carbon emission leak, and then all of a sudden you've got this huge water consumption. And so like it's really hard to justify to say like, yes, maybe the final result, like there's a reason shoes have been made from leather for a really long time. It was a durable, malleable material that held up over time. But the materials we work with now didn't exist when leather was an option.
I guess
And
it's
that
a
for me,
technology, right? To turn
exactly.
or pineapple leaves into leathers.
Exactly. And so the fact that we can now create these leather-like materials without using any animal products that are made from nature, like that to me, it almost kind of became a no-brainer where I got the ability to test it, started with leather, transitioned, then I did half and half. And I got to prove like to myself and to anyone who would tell
Yeah.
me like, your regular customer doesn't want vegan material. I'm like, let's take the term vegan out of the equation. We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about plant-based in nature. And so like, I really like to consider myself a brand that caters to everyone. It's not just for a vegan customer. It's for a customer who wants a beautiful product made out of a really interesting, innovative new material. And it happens to be vegan.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? And I think we're in exactly the same position. I think we thought and we're told that, you're catering for a vegan audience,
Right.
which is, it's lovely that it's growing, but it's still quite small. And actually what we found is really that's not true. We're catering
Yeah,
for a much broader audience.
absolutely.
A lot of people who are, really interested in the environment sustainability. So that is, one reason for them to really look at, some of those unsustainable materials like leather, like wool, and look at, is there a more sustainable option? But I think also, to your point earlier about the story, I think some people are just, it's really cool, right? To kind of go, what? I've got something leather made of apples?
Absolutely. Why wouldn't you want to try something like that? Exactly.
It's just
Yeah.
really interesting. I think people are really sort of, drawn to the sort of the innovation and the novelty of that, as much as it's a great product and it looks beautiful and it's
Absolutely.
sustainable. So it's like, it ticks all those boxes, I think.
That's always how I think about my massive checklist where like I'm not always, clearly I'm talkative and boisterous and passionate, but I'm so rarely, I'm not always next to the shoes when they sell. So
Yeah.
they have to be able to just communicate, like someone's going to make a purchase because they like and feel a connection to a product. And I think a lot of that comes down to design. So ultimately, in order for a product to really be sustainable, it has to be a well-designed product that somebody wants and feels a connection to. Because you
Right.
don't get somebody, you don't always have a spokesperson for the brand being like, let me tell you about apple leather and how it's made and why it's so much of a superior product or why it's a really interesting thing that you should try.
Yeah.
So it does have to check all the boxes. And then the more you explore as a consumer, or even just, as someone who's interested in sustainability, the more you kind of unravel and figure out like, what excites you and why do you want to buy a product? Is it because of how it's made or where it's made or what it's made out of?
So it sounds like everything you've been saying so far is, well, actually, overall, the sustainability aspect was what was really got you thinking we want to be a vegan only brand. Is that right? Was that the main driver for you?
It was a combination. So I'll attribute it in January of this past year. I did the Veganuary challenge.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, which it was
Fine.
phenomenal. Also, like they have the best resources. So, I mean, if for anyone who doesn't know Veganuary, it's a month-long January-based challenge where you go vegan, and pretty much every day in your inbox, you get, recipes and information just to try to make the transition easy and informative. And like, I feel like what I loved so much about the program is that it wasn't like, it didn't come from a place of, you're removing things from your diet. It's more of like an adventurous, this is a new way to try things. And I felt so
Yeah.
aligned with that because that's what I've been doing within my own brand.
Yeah.
And for me, the transition into my diet has always been difficult because I happen to have a lot of dietary restrictions and food allergies. And so
That makes
when
it
I go,
harder to
it
suddenly,
makes it so hard because
yeah.
exactly. So like I already am, it's so difficult to feed when I go to eat somewhere because I physically can't consume things. So it's always been really difficult for me to elect to take things out of my diet because it just makes it like I would just never be able to go and eat anywhere. But one of the kind of strange silver linings of being home from this pandemic was I didn't go out to eat anywhere. So I got to be able to say, well, what happens if you take, exterior forces away? Like, can I make some of these changes that I would want to make in my personal life if I'm just taking care of myself in my home?
That's really
And
interesting.
I think with the month-long challenge too, it's not like, okay, now I have to eat a fully vegan diet and I've totally uprooted my whole life and way of being. It was like, let me test these waters. Let me do it at home for myself and see how it goes. And the more I got really connected to like, I love plant-based material innovations. Why wouldn't I love plant-based food innovations? And I just couldn't I felt like something clicked. It was like the similarities in the food space and the fashion space right now for plant-based innovation are like that's totally the intersection I'm living at right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of, yeah, how did you find it in terms of, were there elements that you found really hard? Like obviously everyone always says cheese was really hard,
Yeah.
or,
You know, having so my like we can get super personal. I'm gluten free and have been for the last 8 years, and I have an onion allergy. So
wow,
it's onions, shallots, leeks, chives, scallions.
ooh,
So
that's in a lot of food.
we're talking two totally separate categories as well. So like if I go out to eat somewhere and I found a totally gluten-free menu, it might be riddled with onions. And so I might be able to be like, cool, I'll take this item and then just like hold all the sauce and everything that makes it good. And then I'll just eat this. So a lot of my diet when I'm out is really based on what can I eat on a menu. And if that's, something that's very much not, if it could be a cheese platter, could be the only thing on a menu that I can physically consume. If I'm traveling somewhere and I don't have another option, it seems like, it always felt like the barrier to entry for me was so
Yeah.
high. But at home, like I'm used to not eating food. So I feel like taking cheese out of my diet for a month was like, all right,
Yeah.
no problem. Like there's a whole host of things I don't eat anymore. Add cheese to the list.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it kind of made things fun in a way of like, I love to cook. I'm constantly cooking for myself. So it was like, try a new recipe and, do it in a new way. And it felt more like additive as opposed to
Yeah.
subtractive in terms of trying something. And it just really clicked with so much of what I've been working on for Sylven. And I was like, oh, duh. Like, what if I was just fully plant-based as a brand? And so like they really became kind of this dual intersection.
Great. So was that the trigger then? Was it going through Veganuary that was the final kind of, okay, yeah, I think
It really was, yeah. And I think also like the pandemic, having a year to slow down. I think I always thought in my mind that I could transition to be a fully vegan brand. But my background in footwear, I've been working in the shoe industry for almost 10 years, and I've never worked for a brand that worked with vegan materials. I've worked with a lot of really high-end leather tanneries, and you just sort of get it ingrained in you. Like if you want to make designer footwear and you want people to take you seriously, you work with leather. And so I never really thought that I would create a vegan brand. It wasn't really what I wanted to create a sustainable product. And as I've kind of taken some time to figure out what's going to make the biggest environmental impact that I can contribute as both a citizen and as a designer and as a founder, I found that the single greatest thing that I could do to reduce my impact was just reduce my meat and leather and dairy use entirely.
Yeah.
And so coming to that realization through my own diet and choices came with like a lot of reflection around I think it was just the time, and the time was right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And look, yeah, so congratulations, that's amazing.
Thank you.
We obviously can't wait to see all the beautiful vegan food that you'll be producing in future as well.
Me too.
How has it gone with your customers? So have
Yeah.
you had any reaction from them in terms of, just like it,
Honestly,
not like it?
it's been fantastic. I feel like already had a strong, so I've spent the last 2 years already making plant-based vegan footwear, but it only accounted for 50% of my collection. And I feel like I got such a positive reaction. So many of my customers were already buying some of my vegan leather styles. And just the way that I sold was very much like, it was based a little bit on material and a little bit on color. So like I made a sandal last summer that you guys featured that I loved all of the things that you did with it, but I had my Simone sandal and you guys had the lemon color, and lemon was such a fun color that, people are like, oh, I gravitate towards this. And they almost don't even think about it if they're not already a vegan consumer. And
Yeah.
so I think that I kind of already had that ethos kind of built in where like, it's about so much more than being vegan or being not vegan. It's about, making a connection to a product that you love and want to wear. And then you find out what it's made out of. And I think it's been interesting because, I have a whole spectrum of customers. Some of them are vegan, some of them are flexitarian,
Yeah.
some of them have never considered sustainability and just are drawn to design. So it's sort
Yeah.
of like, how do you make a product that encompasses people on every step of their journey? And I think people have been really responsive to like, being able to say, this is what we're doing. It's just plant-based. From a brand perspective, I feel like it's been so much clearer. I have to do so much less explanation, or I'm like, oh, well, you ordered the black, but I have a black leather and I have a black vegan leather. Which one do you want? And customers are like, I don't know. Which one do you recommend? I'm like, well, it depends. Exactly. So like I get to eliminate any of that duplication. I don't have to have 2 black SKUs anymore, which is like my warehouse is happier about it. My logistics are happier about it. And like, it makes it easier to talk about and like really dial in the focus of like, we are plant-based. This is what we do. We tested it and we learned what did and didn't work and what we liked and what our customer liked. And so it kind of just feels like a really natural evolution.
I think what's so nice as well is the fact that because you have worked with both, you've worked with animal leather and vegan leathers, I think that adds a lot of credibility to the vegan leathers as well. So I think one thing we get, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about this, is, so some people who are kind of like, well, I'd love to choose vegan leather, but I just think the quality is not going to be there. It's not going to be as good. It's not going to last. It's not going to feel as nice.
Yeah.
And actually, I know, as a premium brand, you just would not have ever made that decision to get in if you didn't feel that just, the leather itself and the products you can make from it would stand as themselves as just amazing high quality products, regardless of even sustainability, right?
Totally. I think that's such a good point too, where like, my point to that is, when I didn't find what I was looking for, I didn't use it.
Yeah.
So like, it's just a lengthy process of, there's been so much that has developed. Even like 2017 feels like it was yesterday in a way. It's not that long ago, but the development from 2017 to 2019, when we first came out with our plant-based vegan products, and then from 2019 to 2021, it's like the plant-based leather conversation is so much different now than it's ever been. And it's, I think, only going to continue to develop and become a little bit more ubiquitous. So I think people are going to be resistant to try something new. But then you also have the people who want to be those early adopters who want something because it's new. So, we're talking also a little bit of like trickle down effects here.
Right. And we're now seeing, designer brands experimenting with apple leather, mushroom leather, cactus leather.
Which
so
I think is
becoming something quite
amazing. I feel like it was the same week where I read an article that Hermes was talking about their mushroom leather bag, that H&M was talking about their cactus leather. They were doing a cactus leather shoe collection. And the fact that we had both H&M and Hermes, which like, that's the spectrum,
Right.
That's all the way right, all the way left. And they're both talking about plant-based materials. Like, there's a lot of nuance to the conversation still, but just having that news come out in the same week was like, oh yeah, like this isn't a fad. Like,
exactly.
This is a change that's happening within the industry. And it's really interesting to see how people are reacting and, how can we take it and make it long lasting and make it substantive.
So can I ask you a bit more about, so you've talked about how, you settled on apple leather because you just really loved it as a material. Can you talk me a bit through that process of, what other leathers did you look at and what do you think the pros and cons are of the, the various vegan materials out there?
Totally. So apple leather was one of the first materials I was able to find that was plant-based. I've worked with some recycled materials in the vegan leather space. And I looked at a couple of like even in 2019, like I want to say I was really one of the first brands in the US that started producing footwear with this apple leather material. So I found a couple of other similar, like kind of fruit-based leathers that I remember specifically, I was sitting in my factory one day and we ordered some swatches and they smelled like fruit,
Oh,
which is
wow.
like kind of fun, but also like, I
Yeah.
feel like there's this weird cognitive dissonance where you're like, well, if it smells like fruit, what happens when I wear it? You know, like,
Yeah. Is it going to rot in a few days or, yeah.
exactly. Like, is this gonna hold up? Like, what is this made out of? And I think similarly, I think there was a big Apple component to it. And this company that sent it to us was like, well, these are just the samples. It's not viable yet to be used in production. And so I think there was a couple different iterations of materials because 2019 was still, I mean, today you could go exactly where like the development is coming out and even a lot of the mushroom leather products not on the market yet.
No, they're not, are they? I was going to say,
Exactly.
I haven't seen that at all.
And I think we're supposed to see it later in the year. But a lot of it is still concept and like, yes, they're making samples, but I think they're still doing a lot of testing to see, what happens when, what's the lifespan? How does it work? So there's still a lot that's happening in terms of like, yes, these things exist, but do they exist in practice or do they exist in theory?
Yeah.
So I found this material that, the apple leather I work with is not the one that was like super fragrant and not viable for footwear yet. I, found another supplier, but I was traveling to Italy and my head of production at my factory in Italy was like, hey, I remember you talking to me about apple leather. I've got a meeting with them. Like I flew to Italy and we drove, I think she picked me up from the airport and was like, yeah, they're 45 minutes away. Like we're going right now. So it was really great to be able to go speak to the people who are making the material, ask, my whole laundry list of questions of, what's the process? How is this happening? What kind of applications for footwear are there? How do I start? Like, how do I make a sample? Like I was just so chomping at the bit to work with the material. And the fact that it was so close to where I make things, kind of going back to my supply chain.
Yeah.
The tightest I can keep things, like I already am manufacturing abroad, which is a whole other conversation about, the tooling and the industry and, the complexity that is footwear. It's really, really difficult to make the shoes that I'm making in the US. There's very, very few, if any, facilities that can handle it. So now, we've got a lot of shipping logistics, which is a huge carbon emission trigger.
Yeah.
So the closer I can keep things to one another, the more I can minimize the footprint of material shipping. So I really loved that it was within the same region. The apples themselves come from Italy. So like there's just the whole system is so close that it just really felt right. And I have fallen in love with the material.
And do you think you will use other vegan leathers in future? Like, have you been investigating any different
Absolutely.
that are on your radar that you think?
Absolutely. I've had cactus leather on my radar for, for a few years, since before it was viable, since before we were seeing products come out with it. I've been working with coconut husks, which are a phenomenal material.
It's really interesting because I've never heard of this before you guys.
All right. I probably have. I've got some, naturally I have some sharing materials.
This is wonderful. This is your first trainer, isn't it?
It is. Oh my gosh. The story behind this too is like this sneaker, finding a sole material that matched my my sustainable needs took me almost 2 years to find a sole because I wanted it to be super natural. And even though there are, rubber can be a natural material, it doesn't always break down super easily. And natural rubber's often mixed with things to keep it like a little bit lighter. There's a lot of EVA and foam and a lot of plastic in sneaker materials. And I want it to be as plastic free as possible. Like I don't work with virgin plastic materials if I can help it at all. Like,
yeah. Oh, we've just you've frozen for a second there. Hopefully we'll be able to get you back. Oh, I'm sorry, we lost you there, Casey, for a couple of minutes.
Let me know. Can you hear me?
You're back, you're back.
Okay.
It was 30 seconds, it's fine.
Okay.
We missed what you were just saying about, I think you were saying that the traditionally trainers are full of plastic components. Yeah, and you don't use any virgin plastic.
Exactly. So in order to avoid virgin plastic, I was really specific about the sole material because I had already been working with this apple leather. I knew I wanted to make an apple leather sneaker, but for me, it's not just about the one main upper material. I'm thinking about a plant-based construction, like through and through. So
yeah, so I've heard that trainers have one of the most complicated products to make because there are so many components to them. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of boots, sandals are like surprisingly much more complicated to make than I think people give them credit for, depending on the sandal. Because like everything is so much smaller, so the workmanship requires a lot more attention. But in terms of components, there really are like a lot of interior components in a sneaker or even a boot, like just things that you don't think of. And, you've got tacks and linings and, reinforcements that the back heel counter to, keep things having shape. I mean, some shoes can have between 60 and 100 different components each, like a single shoe, not even a pair.
Wow. And so you're looking at sustainability.
I'm looking at them all. Exactly. And it's hard because I'm like, I don't want to inundate a customer and they're like, oh, I'm like, that's made out of apples. But I'm like, it's made out of apples. And it's also made out of this thing called lactate hevea, which comes from the sap of a hevea tree. And it's also made from coconut husks. Like, depends on who I'm talking to. But like, for me, it's about the full holistic view of the shoe itself, how the shoe is made, how it gets delivered, like it's built into everything. But I'm going to show you, this is our coconut husk insole. Wow. So you can actually see the coils of the coconut husk on that.
Oh, that's amazing.
This is one of the newer materials I'm working with that I'm so excited about, especially like just the material nerd in me loves that you can see like the actual.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you're the first brand that I know that, well, certainly one, the first brand, Immaculate, that I think is using that particular material. So that's amazing.
It's fantastic. And it's plants have been used for all sorts of, medicinal purposes. And, there is such a huge spectrum of things that the earth already creates for us.
Yes.
And to be able to utilize some of those properties for fashion is like just what makes my heart sing. Yeah. It's so cool to be able to take, I'm like, we've got these apple waste, organic apple leather uppers, and then we're making these coconut husk insoles that are naturally antimicrobial. So it's like a perfect shoe interior. So, things are meant to be worn. So there's got to be a lot of performance aspects to things.
I guess that's the nice thing, isn't it, about a lot of these plant materials, that, like you say, there are other attributes that they have actually over their synthetic or traditional animal leather. So I've heard, for example, cactus leather is great in terms of water resistance. Yeah. So obviously, that's one of the things that animal leather isn't very good at, right? Because,
exactly. Or a lot of other vegan leathers, even, like I tell my customers, apple leather is best to, yes, it can get wet, but you want to make sure, like,
yeah,
I'm going to circle back to our conversation about longevity, because historically speaking, vegan leathers haven't had that same lifespan that animal-based leathers have. Yeah. But the trick is care, like properly caring for the material. And cacti naturally are, water resistant, water repellent. They're made in the desert. So like they have to be like that. Yeah. The thing about vegan leathers is that they dry out, and that's when you get the crackling effect. Like if you've ever seen a vintage pair of shoes that have been around for 15, 20 years that aren't made from real leather, you start to see that crackling, and it's because it's dry. Yeah. So one of the things I've gotten really excited about is finding the best ways to hydrate vegan leather using a vegan and plant-based, conditioner, more or less. And my secret,
the top tip for that.
Yeah, my top tip for apple leather specifically, and you always want to test a little swatch before you try anything new, but for my apple leather, I've been using this really amazing plant-based baby oil.
Ooh.
It's a brand called Pipette, I want to say. Okay. And it's this very cool, very natural, I want to say it's a French product. but you can buy it online. Like, I'll send you a link to it because I think it's such a great
Amazing.
cleaner.
Yeah.
So it cleans and it conditions and it hydrates. And I find that it helps also make a little bit of a seal so that it keeps the apple leather a little bit more water protected. But
Yeah.
it hydrates it from the inside, it buffs out some of the dirt, and it conditions it as it goes. So I take like I'll use like a reusable cloth
Uh-huh.
and just kind of like, I think I have a reel on my Instagram page
I
of
think,
me
yeah, I
kind of
remember seeing it. Yeah.
doing the whole process. But you just take like a little bit of oil and you just kind of buff it in. I think you could probably use like coconut oil and kind of um, more household
I feel like we need
things
to be doing
as
some
well.
experimentation here.
I honestly, like, sometimes I set up like a little lab
Yeah.
where like I've been thinking about kind of concocting my own as like our apple leather cleaner. So I mean that's potentially in
Yeah.
the
So
future.
then, yeah, careful.
Exactly.
I think
Totally.
it's actually a great idea.
Yeah, and it might be really like it might literally be like me in my kitchen lab, but like, okay, we've got a little bit of oil, a little bit of coconut, maybe add a couple essential oils just to make it a more like, holistic experience.
Definitely. I think
Yeah,
definitely do it. Can I
I'm
just
so here
ask
for
you,
it.
do you have a favorite product from your collection?
I've been so on my sneaker train for like,
Yeah.
I've been wearing them nonstop. I have the black pair. And I think especially like, I haven't been going anywhere because, it hasn't been safe to go anywhere. And, I go for walks around the block or, I keep it really tight in my neighborhood, but I've just haven't taken the sneakers off in the last, I was wearing my prototype for a year. Like I've been wearing the sneakers almost for about 2 years at this point, which
Wow.
also is a testament to how long I was making the sneaker before I released it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, yeah, I think for these times as well, we're seeing that at Immaculate, right? That, sales of high heel stilettos have not been really high, but
I know.
wow, trainers, like everyone, because, like you, a lot of us are at home or just, walking around locally.
Yeah.
We want to be comfortable and casual.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
Also dress up nicely too, which is fun. Like, it's fun to play with pairing because it's such a sleek and minimal look that you can like it's a designer sneaker. So I mean you
yeah,
can wear it with a dress or jumpsuit just as easily as you can do like a jogger and it kind
100%.
of elevates the look.
Yeah, dress it up or dress it down,
Press it down. Yeah. And then my other go-to is gonna be my white boot.
which is amazing. I think we had somebody contact us recently about getting them for their wedding, which I thought, wow, that'll just be like stunning.
I have a couple friends and customers who have purchased this for their wedding, and it is like the coolest wedding look.
Isn't
I'm
it?
a big fan of it. But yeah, the Almasi boot, this because it's a white boot, this as a fashion item has really been a really great catalyst to get the non-vegan customer to try a plant-based leather because the style is just something that's interesting and unique and
Yeah,
different. So I feel like this boot I owe a great gratitude towards for kind of helping me test waters I didn't even know I was testing.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you, in terms of other brands, are there any other brands that you're seeing doing really cool stuff at the moment in the vegan space? Are there, which ones have you got your eye on that you really like, or you're just personally a fan of?
Yeah. So who I follow very closely is they're a handbag brand called Von Holzhausen.
Oh yes.
And so what I love about them is that they're creating their own materials. Because as a material nerd, I'm like, that's my ultimate dream. Is like if I could have a Sylven New York plant-based proprietary material that I get the
Yeah.
chance to develop. Like they just came out with this new bamboo leather that's made from bamboo, but they've been creating their own, I think they call it Technic leather, and their founder has a background in like automobile design. So I think she kind of comes from an interior, like car interiors.
Yeah.
Um, so I've been loving following their journey. I also really like that when they started, they did vegan and leather versions of their bags, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then I think transitioned to be fully vegan once they were like, oh, we created our own material. And this is, here are the 15 reasons why it's better.
Yeah.
So that's been really cool. And then in terms of like clothing brands, I almost wore it today, but Tayo is a brand that you carry. I
Yeah.
have my half moon. I almost wore it and it's a little too warm today, but I wear that dress from Tayo like once a week.
They are just stunning, aren't they? And again, just so hot on sustainability from every sort of point of view that they can think of, I think. Which is,
definitely. I know the founder, Catherine, and she's phenomenal. So
yeah. Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
I've taken up so much of your time, Casey, but it's been so fascinating. I feel like
yeah, you hit me on my favorite topic. I'm like, I'll talk to you till the sun
well,
comes
I
up.
think that's part two. But I just want to end with kind of what's next for Sylven. So obviously you've now decided to be a 100% vegan brand. You know, we were talking earlier outside of this before we started recording just about how COVID actually meant you could tear up, you know, plans or tear up the rule book and, you know, do things very, very differently. Like what are your plans for the next, you know, year or few years?
I'm excited. We're moving so much slower than we ever did. Where like I'm kind of taking back the concept of collections, and now I'm focused on items. So I'm like, all right, what's my next boot? What's my next sandal? And my focus is going to continue to be on material and finding new exciting combinations. So, you know, we've got our apple coconut. I was talking to one of my suppliers about a zucchini lining at one point.
Wow.
So I just want to keep pushing the envelope and keep finding new ways to make exciting products.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we very much look forward to seeing those when they come out. And obviously you've got your existing collection already, which is beautiful.
Thank you.
So yeah, if anyone's sort of looking at investing in some beautiful new boots or beautiful new shoes, do check out Sylven at Immaculate Vegan. They are one of our favorite brands. Thank you so much, Casey. Thank you for all your amazing insight and knowledge, and the best of luck with everything you're doing right now. Can't wait to see it all unfold.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.